The cabin's wooden door creaked open wider, revealing a space that seemed to breathe with its own quiet life. James stepped aside, motioning for me to enter, and as I crossed the threshold, the scent of aged wood and burning embers enveloped me like a familiar embrace. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with high ceilings supported by exposed beams that created an atmosphere both rustic and welcoming. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting dancing shadows across the room. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled not just with books but with curious objects, animal skulls, pressed flowers, and what appeared to be carefully preserved bird nests. Natural light filtered through small windows, illuminating dust motes that floated lazily in the air. The furniture was sparse but well-worn, suggesting years of use rather than neglect. A worn leather armchair sat near the fire, surrounded by stacks of field guides and notebooks. On a sturdy wooden table, various tools and equipment were neatly arranged: binoculars, maps, and what looked like scientific instruments for measuring weather patterns. James moved with deliberate grace, his presence filling the space without overwhelming it. He gestured toward the armchair, but I found myself drawn to the bookshelves instead. My fingers brushed against the spines of books, feeling their textures and reading titles that spoke of wilderness survival, local flora and fauna, and philosophical musings on solitude. Each object seemed carefully chosen, telling fragments of a story about the man who lived here. "You seem comfortable in your element," I observed, my voice sounding different in this intimate space. The words hung between us, carrying more weight than their simple meaning suggested. James paused in his movement, turning to face me with an expression that was both assessing and appreciative. His eyes lingered on mine longer than necessary before he responded. "This place is more than just shelter," he said finally, his deep voice resonating in the quiet room. "It's where I connect with something larger than myself." The statement felt loaded with unspoken significance, and I found myself wondering if he meant only nature or something more profound. The air between us seemed charged, each glance and gesture carrying layers of potential meaning. As we settled into conversation, the dynamic between us shifted subtly. What had started as a chance encounter in the woods now felt like the beginning of something more complex. James's questions about my photography revealed an unexpected depth of understanding about art and self-expression. His insights weren't merely surface-level observations. They cut to the core of why I sought those solitary moments in nature, why I needed to strip away societal expectations along with my clothing. Our discussion flowed naturally from technical aspects of photography to more personal topics. James spoke of his own experiences living alone in the wilderness, of finding peace in isolation while simultaneously craving human connection. There was a vulnerability in his words that matched the raw honesty I tried to capture in my photographs. We were two people accustomed to solitude, yet here we were, drawn together by circumstance and something deeper neither of us could yet articulate. The afternoon light began to fade, and James moved to stoke the fire without breaking the rhythm of our conversation. Watching him move, I noticed how his presence seemed to anchor the entire space. Every action, the way he handled tools, arranged logs in the fireplace, or poured tea into mismatched mugs, carried a sense of purpose and deliberation. It wasn't just his physicality that commanded attention. It was the quiet confidence that radiated from him, making the cabin feel smaller despite its actual size. When he finally handed me a mug of steaming tea, our fingers brushed briefly, and the contact sent a jolt through me that wasn't entirely unexpected. What surprised me was how natural it felt, how right. In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of his solitary life, I understood that James wasn't just offering me tea. He was extending an invitation to explore something neither of us fully understood yet. The conversation turned to our shared appreciation for nature's cycles and rhythms, But beneath the surface talk of seasons and wildlife migrations, there was an undercurrent of something more intimate. We discussed boundaries, not just physical ones in the wilderness, but emotional barriers we'd built around ourselves. James spoke of his years spent learning to read the subtle signs of the forest, and I realized he was doing the same with me now, interpreting my gestures and expressions with the same careful attention. As darkness fell completely, the fire became our primary source of light, creating an intimacy that felt both safe and exposing. Shadows danced across James's features, highlighting the lines that time and experience had etched into his face. Each wrinkle seemed to tell a story, and I found myself wanting to trace them with my fingertips, to map the geography of his life with more than just words. The realization startled me, not because of its content, but because of how naturally it arose. In the city, such thoughts would have triggered anxiety and self-doubt. But here, in this remote cabin with a man who seemed to understand silence better than most people understood speech, it felt like the most honest thing I'd ever experienced. The wilderness had always been my sanctuary, but now it seemed to be offering something more, a chance to redefine what connection truly meant. Boundaries of understanding. As the evening deepened, our conversation took on new dimensions, each revelation peeling back layers of carefully constructed facades. James spoke of his past relationships with a candor that caught me off guard, not explicit details, but honest reflections on love, loss, and the struggle to reconcile personal truth with societal expectations. His words weren't just stories. They were bridges connecting our separate islands of experience. I found myself sharing things I'd never admitted aloud, not even to myself. The way certain photographs represented more than artistic expression, how each image captured fragments of a journey I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. The fire crackled softly, its warmth seeping into spaces within me that had long been cold. James's occasional touches, a hand briefly resting on my shoulder, fingers brushing mine when passing the teapot, carried meanings beyond their physical simplicity. These weren't just gestures of comfort. They were explorations, testing boundaries we both instinctively understood but couldn't yet articulate. Each contact sent ripples through my consciousness, challenging preconceived notions about touch and intimacy. Our discussion naturally evolved into exploring how society's constructs had shaped our understanding of relationships and identity. James described his gradual withdrawal from conventional social circles, not out of rejection, but from a need to find authenticity in human connections. His insights resonated deeply with my own struggles. The pressure to conform to expected narratives, the internal conflict between public persona and private truth. We dissected these themes with increasing intensity, our voices sometimes dropping to whispers as if afraid of disturbing the delicate balance we were building. The cabin itself seemed to participate in our exploration. The shifting firelight created zones of visibility and shadow, mirroring our alternating moments of revelation and retreat. When James stood to add more wood to the fire, his silhouette against the flames seemed almost symbolic, a figure choosing to illuminate rather than hide. I watched him move, realizing that every aspect of his being communicated volumes beyond spoken words. Our dialogue touched upon universal themes of belonging and acceptance, yet remained intensely personal. James shared his observations about how nature operated without judgment, how ecosystems thrived through diversity and interdependence. These metaphors weren't forced. They emerged organically from our surroundings and experiences. As he spoke, I saw parallels between ecological harmony and human relationships, the importance of allowing space for growth while maintaining essential connections. The evening's progression brought moments of profound stillness, where words became unnecessary. During these pauses, the crackling fire and distant night sounds formed a soundtrack to our unspoken communication. We studied each other openly, permission granted through mutual understanding rather than explicit consent. The weight of these silent exchanges felt heavier than any conversation, carrying implications that neither of us was ready to fully address, but both acknowledged existed. When James finally broke one of these silences, his voice carried a different quality, softer yet more penetrating. "There's courage in vulnerability," he said, his gaze steady. "Not just in showing yourself to others, but in allowing yourself to be seen." The statement struck me with unexpected force, crystallizing much of what we'd been circling around all evening. It wasn't just about physical exposure or emotional openness. It was about embracing authenticity in all its forms. Our positions had shifted subtly throughout the evening, moving closer without conscious intention. The space between us now felt charged with possibility rather than uncertainty. James's occasional glances held new depths, and my responses, both verbal and nonverbal, carried layers of meaning I hadn't previously allowed myself to express. The boundaries we'd been discussing theoretically were becoming tangible, their edges blurring in ways that felt both terrifying and liberating. These developments weren't accompanied by dramatic declarations or sudden revelations. Instead, they manifested through incremental changes, the way our conversation flowed more freely, how our bodies oriented toward each other naturally, the increasing comfort with which we occupied the same space. Each small shift represented a step across previously defined lines, yet none felt like crossing boundaries. Rather, they felt like expanding definitions, creating new spaces where authentic connection could exist without fear or pretense. Reflections in still water. The following morning arrived with a clarity that mirrored my newfound perspective. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows at oblique angles, catching particles of dust that danced like tiny constellations. James had risen early, leaving me to wake alone in the armchair where our conversation had eventually lulled into companionable silence. The absence of his presence felt significant, not as a void, but as space waiting to be filled with new understanding. As I wandered outside, the forest greeted me with dew-laden spiderwebs and birdsong that seemed to echo our previous night's dialogue. The wilderness, once my soul's sanctuary, now felt transformed, no longer just a refuge from society, but a canvas for exploring deeper truths about myself. The trees stood taller, their branches reaching skyward with purpose rather than mere existence. Even the air carried a different quality, crisp with possibilities rather than just mountain freshness. Returning inside, I found James preparing breakfast, his movements economical yet graceful. The domestic scene contrasted sharply with the profound discussions of the previous night, yet somehow enhanced their significance. Simple actions, cracking eggs, slicing bread, took on ritualistic importance, each mundane task imbued with the weight of shared understanding. We ate in comfortable silence, occasionally exchanging glances that carried more meaning than words could convey. Later, as we cleared the dishes, James proposed a walk through his property. The suggestion felt loaded with intention, though neither of us acknowledged it explicitly. Our path wound through dense undergrowth, emerging occasionally into clearings that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains. With each step, I felt the landscape working its magic, dissolving remaining barriers between thought and feeling, between individual identity and shared experience. At one particular clearing, James stopped suddenly, pointing toward a small pond whose surface reflected the sky with perfect clarity. "This is where I come when I need answers," he said simply. The statement hung in the air, inviting interpretation rather than demanding response. We stood there for several minutes, watching clouds drift across the water's mirrored surface, their images distorted and reformed by the gentlest breeze. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. The water's ability to reflect while remaining unchanged, to show truth while maintaining its essence. I realized that my journey, much like this pond, had been about finding reflection without losing identity. The encounter in the meadow, the subsequent visit to James's cabin, the conversations that stretched through night into dawn, each had been ripples disturbing the surface of my carefully maintained solitude, yet rather than destroying the image, they had clarified it. James broke the silence with a question that seemed to emerge from the very landscape around us. "Do you remember what you were reaching for in that photograph?" His words recalled the image I'd examined the previous night, arms extended toward the sky, face turned upward in pursuit of something intangible. The memory triggered a cascade of realizations about my artistic journey and personal growth. I had been seeking connection, not just with nature, but with authenticity itself, with the courage to exist beyond prescribed boundaries. Our return to the cabin was marked by a new kind of silence, one filled with understanding rather than uncertainty. The afternoon passed in companionable activity. James showed me his collection of pressed plants, explaining how each specimen represented a moment of discovery or insight. I shared stories of my photographic expeditions, describing locations not just geographically but emotionally. Each narrative wove another thread into the tapestry of our developing relationship, strengthening bonds that transcended simple friendship or attraction. As twilight approached, we found ourselves back in the main room, the fire newly kindled against the evening chill. This time, however, the atmosphere felt fundamentally altered. The earlier exploration of boundaries had given way to something more substantial, a recognition of shared values, mutual respect, and the potential for deeper connection. The firelight played across James's features differently now, highlighting not just age lines, but paths of wisdom gained through lived experience. We spoke little during these final hours together, yet communication flowed more freely than ever before. Gestures carried weight, glances conveyed volumes, and silences spoke louder than words. The cabin, once just a physical structure, had transformed into a vessel for transformation, its walls containing not just two individuals, but the possibility of something greater emerging from their intersection. When the time came for me to leave, neither of us attempted to define what had transpired between us. Instead, we embraced the ambiguity, recognizing that some truths need time to crystallize. James walked me to my car, handing me the compass with a smile that suggested he knew I'd already found true north. As I drove away, the forest closing in behind me, I understood that my sanctuary had expanded beyond physical wilderness to include the vast, uncharted territory of authentic human connection, new horizons of understanding. The drive back to Cedar Brook unfolded like a meditation, each mile marker marking not just distance traveled, but layers of self-discovery peeled away. The compass, warm in my pocket, served as both literal and metaphorical guide, its needle pointing not just toward magnetic north, but toward a direction I had long sensed but never fully acknowledged. The wilderness, once my solitary sanctuary, now pulsed with memories of shared understanding, transforming familiar landscapes into canvases of possibility. Upon returning home, I found my apartment strangely foreign yet comforting, like rediscovering an old friend after gaining new perspective. The photographs from the meadow stared back at me from my computer screen, each image now imbued with additional layers of meaning. The composition that had captured my reaching form spoke volumes about aspiration and authenticity, about the courage to extend oneself beyond known boundaries. I realized that my artistic journey paralleled my personal evolution, each photograph documenting not just moments in nature, but steps toward embracing my complete identity. The days that followed brought subtle, yet profound changes to my routine. Morning hikes through familiar trails felt different, each step resonating with the awareness that solitude and connection weren't mutually exclusive states, but complementary aspects of a richer existence. My photography took on new dimensions, capturing not just external landscapes, but internal transformations. The mirror I used in compositions now reflected not just sky and trees, but the evolving relationship between self and environment, between individual identity and community. News of my encounter spread gradually through Cedarbrook's tight-knit community, though not in the way I had feared. Margaret, the elderly cafe patron, became a confidant of sorts, sharing stories of her own unconventional relationships and encouraging me to embrace the town's growing acceptance of diverse lifestyles. Other residents, initially curious about my frequent visits to James's cabin, soon accepted our friendship as another thread in Cedarbrook's social fabric. James and I maintained regular contact, our relationship evolving through shared experiences rather than defined labels. Weekend hikes became opportunities for both physical exploration and philosophical discussion, each trail revealing new perspectives on nature and human connection. Our conversations, whether conducted over crackling fires or during quiet moments in the forest, continued to challenge and expand our understanding of relationships, identity, and authenticity. The broader implications of our connection rippled through Cedarbrook's social dynamics. Younger residents, observing our comfortable interactions and mutual respect, began questioning their own assumptions about relationships and identity. Community gatherings, once strictly heteronormative in their social structures, gradually opened to more diverse expressions of connection. The town's traditional values didn't erode, but rather expanded to accommodate new understandings of human relationships. My artistic work began reflecting these changes, capturing moments of genuine connection between diverse individuals in natural settings. Exhibitions that once focused solely on landscape photography now included portraits of Cedarbrook's residents interacting with their environment, documenting the town's evolving social landscape alongside its physical beauty. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many viewers expressing how the images helped them see familiar faces and places in new, more inclusive ways. James's influence extended beyond our personal relationship, inspiring me to become more involved in environmental education programs that emphasized inclusivity and diversity in outdoor activities. Together, we organized workshops that encouraged participants to explore nature while also exploring aspects of their identity they might otherwise suppress. These initiatives helped create safe spaces for LGBTQ+ individuals to experience wilderness areas without fear of judgment or exclusion. As seasons changed, so did Cedarbrook's character. The town's annual summer festival, once a celebration of traditional family values, transformed into a more inclusive event that welcomed diverse family structures and relationship dynamics. Local businesses began displaying rainbow flags alongside their usual decorations, signaling support for all community members regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. These changes weren't imposed, but emerged organically from increased understanding and acceptance. Our relationship with nature evolved alongside these social changes. Forest trails that had once been solitary paths became shared journeys, with groups of diverse individuals finding common ground in their appreciation for wilderness. Conservation efforts gained new momentum as more community members recognized the importance of protecting spaces where authentic self-expression could flourish alongside native flora and fauna. The boundary between human and natural worlds blurred in beautiful ways, mirroring the blending of personal and communal identities. Through it all, the compass remained a constant reminder of direction found not through rigid adherence to societal norms, but through honest navigation of one's true path. Its worn surface and precise mechanism symbolized the balance between experience and aspiration, between acknowledging where one has been while courageously pursuing where one needs to go. Each time I held it, I remembered that moment in the meadow when vulnerability led to discovery, when being seen authentically opened doors to understanding far beyond initial embarrassment or fear. The transformation wasn't confined to Cedarbrook's borders. News of the town's progressive approach to diversity and inclusion spread to neighboring communities, inspiring similar initiatives elsewhere. Environmental organizations began incorporating discussions about identity and authenticity into their programming, recognizing that protecting natural spaces included creating environments where all individuals could feel safe exploring their relationship with wilderness. This broader impact demonstrated how personal journeys of self-discovery could catalyze meaningful social change. As winter approached, bringing snow to the mountain peaks and crisp air to the valleys, I found myself standing in that same meadow where everything had begun. The mirror lay where I had left it months before, now partially buried in autumn leaves. Picking it up, I saw my reflection clearly for the first time. Not just my physical appearance, but the person I had become through embracing authenticity and connection. The sky above remained vast and welcoming, just as it had been during that first encounter. But now it contained multitudes more possibilities, infinite directions in which to grow and explore. In this moment of reflection, I understood that the journey wasn't about reaching a destination, but about continually expanding horizons. Each step forward revealed new landscapes to traverse, both external and internal. The wilderness remained my sanctuary, but now it housed not just solitude, but the promise of connection with nature, with community, and most importantly, with the truest version of myself.